It began like any other lively gathering, with laughter bouncing off the walls and conversations crackling with energy. People were comfortable, a little reckless, the way crowds get when they think the night belongs entirely to them. Someone, feeling particularly bold, decided it was the perfect time to tease Caroline's husband. It wasn't just a quiet jab either. It was loud, public, designed to entertain everyone within earshot. The kind of mocking that carries an edge, not just a joke, but a deliberate challenge to someone's dignity. At first, it might have seemed harmless, maybe even funny to the ones who didn't know better. The kind of moment that passes quickly and gets forgotten by morning. But there was something different about this. It wasn't just friendly teasing. It had that sharpness, that hunger for an easy target that reveals more about the one throwing the punch than the one receiving it. The crowd chuckled awkwardly, torn between amusement and discomfort. Some leaned in, waiting to see how far it would go. There's a certain kind of arrogance that grows in rooms full of applause. It makes some people believe they're invincible, that their words can cut through anyone without consequence. That night, that arrogance was on full display, as if the louder the jokes, the more untouchable the person telling them became. But that's the trick about power built on showmanship. It only lasts as long as everyone agrees to play along. The comments kept coming, each one building on the last, growing sharper, bolder, less funny, and more cruel. What had started as a casual jab was now something else entirely. It was a performance, and Carolina's husband was cast as the fool without even being given a choice. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, laughter thinning out, glances being exchanged across the room. A few faces wore the kind of tight smile people force when they know they're watching something wrong but don't know how to stop it. The truth is, you can only poke at someone's pride for so long before something changes. It's like pulling a lion's tail while pretending it's a house cat. You believe you're in control until the lion reminds you exactly what it is. As the jokes landed harder, the energy in the room grew more brittle. It was no longer simple, teasing. It was an attack, cloaked in humor, meant to elevate the speaker by dragging someone else down. Mockery thrives on the assumption that the target will stay silent, that they will shrink, laugh it off, absorb the hit without flinching, so the crowd can keep its entertainment guilt-free. But not everyone plays along. Some people have a limit, a quiet strength that sits beneath the surface until the right or wrong moment wakes it up. And when that moment came, it changed everything. It wasn't loud at first. It didn't need to be. A door shifted, a presence entered, not with shouting or grand gestures, but with a weight that pulled all the air out of the room. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the ones who had been laughing the hardest went silent, their smiles faltering under the sudden change they couldn't quite name. There's a difference between the kind of authority people pretend to have and the kind that walks into a room and takes up space without asking permission. That difference was impossible to ignore now. You could feel it, like a crackle in the air before a storm hits. The person who had been so comfortable mocking Carolina's husband found himself suddenly exposed, like a magician realizing his audience had seen through the trick. This wasn't about volume or violence. It was about the undeniable reality that some people do not break under pressure. They reveal who they are. And in that moment, the game changed completely. What had seemed funny seconds before now felt hollow, childish, desperate. There's nothing more uncomfortable than realizing the person you are laughing at holds more strength in their silence than you do in all your noise. The mocking stopped. Not because someone asked politely, not because of threats, but because the weight of real respect demands it. The night continued, but it wasn't the same. The crowd was quieter, more thoughtful, aware in a way they hadn't been before. One who thought he could mock freely without consequence, had been reminded of a hard, simple truth. True dignity doesn't have to announce itself. It just arrives, and everything else adjusts. There's a moment, rare and unmistakable, when someone steps into a room and everything shifts. It's not about their size, their clothes, or even the volume of their voice. It's something deeper, something that lives in the way they carry themselves. Caroline's husband had that presence. It wasn't loud or demanding. It didn't announce itself with flashy gestures. It was quieter than that, heavier, like a force of nature moving silently through the space. The door opened, and suddenly what had been a circus of laughter and careless jokes turned still, almost cautious. People noticed him without knowing why they noticed. It was in the way he walked, not rushing, not hesitant, but deliberate. Each step seemed to claim the ground it touched, as if he wasn't entering someone else's domain, but stepping into what had always, quietly, been his. Eyes that had been darting around the room a moment earlier now locked onto him, drawn as if pulled by invisible strings. It wasn't fear exactly, though maybe there was a trace of it. It was more like a recognition, a bone-deep understanding, that the rules of the room had just changed. Before, confidence had belonged to the loudest voices, to the ones who thought they could control the moment with humor and charm. Now, it belonged to someone else entirely, and he hadn't spoken a single word. True authority doesn't need to fight for attention. It bends the atmosphere around it. Caroline's husband wasn't dressed to impress. There was no flashing wealth, no designer arrogance. His presence didn't come from the clothes he wore or the titles he carried. It came from within, from a life lived with a certain weight, from experiences that taught him that strength isn't measured by how loudly you laugh at others, but by how steadily you stand when others try to push you down. His eyes moved calmly, across the room, seeing everything without rushing to react. It was the gaze of a man who didn't need validation to know his worth. The ones who had been laughing the hardest now found themselves shifting awkwardly, glancing away, fidgeting, with their glasses or their phones. It's an ugly feeling, being caught out when the energy you were feeding on suddenly turns cold. Every room, every gathering has its unspoken hierarchy. Earlier, it had seemed like it belonged to the loudest, the flashiest, the most charismatic. Now it was clear it belonged to the one who didn't have to perform for it. In the corner, a few people tried to force the laughter back into the space, pretending nothing had changed. But it was too late. You can't unfeel that kind of presence once you've encountered it. It unsettles something deep inside, the realization that no matter how many people you impress, there are always those who move through the world by a different, older code, a code that doesn't need an audience. Caroline's husband didn't respond with anger or insults. He didn't raise his voice or demand apologies. His mere existence was enough to reframe the entire situation. The mockery that had seemed so harmless minutes earlier now looked desperate, petty, small. What had been mistaken for cleverness revealed itself as cruelty, laid bare under the gaze of someone who knew exactly who he was and didn't need to say it aloud. There's a gravity that comes from living without fear of others' opinions. It's not something that can be faked. It's earned through hard lessons, through knowing that real power has nothing to do with popularity and everything to do with self-respect. He moved through the room with that kind of certainty, each breath a silent reminder that some people walk in truth, while others hide behind noise. The person who had been so eager to be the center of attention now found themselves shrinking, almost imperceptibly, as if trying to make themselves smaller in the face of something they couldn't out-talk or outshine. It wasn't humiliation. It was correction. A wordless, irreversible shift in understanding. You can mock someone's appearance, their words, even their dreams, but you cannot mock what's unshakable inside them. Caroline's husband didn't have to prove anything. The room already knew. And once you recognize real presence, real strength, you can't ever unsee it. It changes the way you measure every person. Respect isn't a prize that can be demanded with a loud voice or flashy gestures. It doesn't bend for those who seek it by force or through charm. True respect, the kind that fills a room and changes the way people hold themselves, only belongs to those who have earned it by how they live, not by how they perform. That was what became undeniable as the air shifted, and the crowd, once giddy with laughter, found themselves facing something they hadn't expected. Fame has a way of tricking people into believing they are owed respect. That adoration, applause, and attention somehow equal true esteem. It's an easy lie to believe when the cameras are always pointed in your direction and people are eager to laugh at anything you say, no matter how careless or cruel. But when real respect enters a room, quiet, steady, unshakable, it exposes that lie instantly. It becomes clear who holds actual weight and who has simply been floating on borrowed air. Caroline's husband didn't need a spotlight to command attention. His respect wasn't handed to him through popularity or convenience. It lived in the way he moved, the way he stood without shrinking or puffing up. It was written in the lines on his face, in the calmness of his hands, in the certainty of his silence. He wasn't playing a part for anyone. He wasn't chasing approval. He simply was, and that truth was impossible to ignore. The ones who had been so quick to laugh earlier suddenly seemed uncertain, their easy confidence draining away as if someone had opened a window and let all the warmth out. Eyes flickered, toward him and then away again, unable to hold the steady calm that met them. It's a humbling thing, being faced with someone who doesn't need your laughter, doesn't need your permission, doesn't need to pretend to be anything other than exactly who they are. In a world that rewards noise, it's rare to meet someone whose power comes from silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any shouted joke, louder than any staged performance. The kind that reminds you, without a single word, that character outweighs charisma every time. In that room, in that moment, the difference between the two became as stark as a crack of lightning in a dark sky. The mocking that had once felt so effortless now looked like a desperate grab for attention, childish and hollow. It was clear to everyone watching that real dignity could not be touched by cheap laughter. True dignity doesn't react wildly to provocation. It doesn't lower itself to fight petty battles. It simply stands there, whole and untouched, and, in doing so, it demands a level of respect that cannot be faked. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic explosion. There didn't need to be. The quiet, immovable presence of Caroline's husband was enough to unravel the entire act. It left the room with a sharp, almost painful clarity about what real strength looks like. Strength is not in belittling others to raise yourself higher. It is not in hiding behind charm or cleverness. Strength is in the refusal to let others define your worth no matter how loudly they try. Those who watched felt it deep in their bones, even if they couldn't quite put it into words. They saw the difference between being admired for spectacle and being respected for substance. One is fleeting, vanishing the moment the spotlight shifts. The other is permanent, woven into the very way a person moves and breathes and exists. In that room, the crowd witnessed a reminder they hadn't even known they needed, that real greatness often wears no costume at all. There were no speeches, no demands, no need for explanations. The truth hung heavy in the air, speaking louder than anything else could. The ones who had once believed they were holding court with their jokes and their laughter now found themselves standing before someone they could not diminish, could not shame, could not move. The only thing left for them to do was to adjust, to recognize the presence that had entered, and to realize that respect cannot be mocked into submission. It either exists, or it doesn't. And when it does, it is undeniable. The atmosphere changed faster than anyone could have predicted. One moment, the room was vibrating with laughter, shoulders shaking and glasses clinking together in the easy chaos of a gathering that had gotten too comfortable. The next moment, the entire energy shifted. It wasn't the kind of shift that comes from someone shouting or demanding attention. It was quieter, heavier, the way the world feels right before a heavy storm rolls in. A natural pause, a collective holding of breath. Where there had been mockery and noise, there was now tension so thick it practically hummed against the skin. People's smiles froze halfway across their faces. Conversations stumbled into silence. No one had told them to stop laughing. No one needed to. Something fundamental had shifted, and whether they understood it fully or not, everyone in the room could feel it. The jokes that had seemed so clever, so easy just minutes ago, now hung awkwardly in the air, exposed for what they really were. Empty, cruel, and weak. It's an uncomfortable thing, realizing that you've been part of something that looked light-hearted on the surface, but carried something darker underneath. The laughter, once loud and boastful, now sounded almost grotesque in memory. Eyes darted around the room looking for something, anything to latch onto, to make sense of the sudden collapse of the moment. The mood didn't shift because of an argument. It didn't shift because someone demanded it. It shifted because real presence demands a reckoning with truth, and the truth once seen can't be laughed away. It forces a recalibration. People who thought they had the upper hand realized they had been standing on nothing but smoke. Their easy cruelty had been exposed, not with retaliation, but with an undeniable strength that didn't need to shout to be heard. There's a kind of silence that feels louder than any scream. That's what filled the room. Not just the absence of sound, but a roaring awareness that everything had changed. It was the kind of silence that makes people rethink what they just said, makes them swallow their words and glance nervously at the ground. It wasn't guilt forced upon them. It was guilt rising naturally from within, stirred by the sudden recognition of the difference between shallow performance and true character. Those who had been laughing the hardest now seemed the smallest. No one had to point it out. The moment had stripped away all illusions, leaving only the raw truth behind. The jokes weren't funny anymore because the target of their laughter had proven, without lifting a finger, that he was beyond their reach. They hadn't dented him. They hadn't embarrassed him. They had only exposed their own pettiness. The energy that once belonged to the loudest person in the room now belonged to the one who had said the least. That's the power of dignity. It doesn't compete for attention. It draws it naturally. And when it stands firm, everything else, all the noise and pretense, collapses under its own weight. The room, once buzzing with cheap amusement, now felt heavy with a different kind of weight. Respect. Not the forced, grudging kind that comes from fear, but the reluctant, genuine kind that rises when people witness something they can't deny, no matter how badly they might want to. It was in the way people lowered their voices, the way they straightened their backs, the way they stopped trying to be the center of attention. No one dared pick up the old jokes again. They had died quietly and completely. In their place was something far more serious, far more lasting. Lessons learned in silence are often the ones that stick the deepest. No one would forget what they saw that night. They would carry it with them, a quiet reminder that some people are untouchable, not because they demand it, but because they live in a way that commands it naturally. Some moments teach without lectures. Some moments correct without punishments. All it takes is for true strength to step into the light, and all the noise, all the arrogance, all the games fall away, powerless against it. Not every moment in life asks for a response. Some moments demand something much harder, the discipline to stand firm, to embody everything you believe without shouting, without showing off, without needing to break others to prove your worth. What unfolded that night wasn't about revenge or payback. It wasn't about one-upping the loudest voice or matching cruelty with cruelty. It was about the quiet, undeniable force of dignity meeting arrogance, and dignity winning without, even raising its hand. People often believe that the loudest one controls the room. They think quick wit or clever insults make them stronger. But real strength doesn't need to perform. It doesn't need validation. True strength reveals itself in how you carry yourself when others try to diminish you. It shows in your refusal to be pulled down into the noise, in your quiet confidence that speaks louder than any joke or insult ever could. In that room, a lesson was written in silence, one that words could never have explained as powerfully. Mockery crumbled. Superficial, charm faded. What remained was something undeniable. The presence of someone who knew who they were, someone whose respect for themselves could not be shaken by cheap laughter or shallow cruelty. And the people who witnessed it understood, deep in places. They didn't talk about that real power cannot be borrowed, faked, or bought. It is lived. It is earned. It is easy to believe that appearances are enough, that if you can laugh louder, speak faster, shine brighter, you will win. But moments like this remind us that appearances are nothing when measured against the quiet weight of true character. And in the end, When the noise fades and the lights go dim, people do not remember who made the most jokes or who drew the most attention. They remember who stood without flinching. They remember who carried themselves with a strength so real, it changed the temperature of the room. Carolina's husband didn't win the night by fighting. He didn't have to. He won it by standing there, by being who he was, unshaken and unapologetic. And in doing so, he reminded everyone that real respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, quietly, steadily, through the life you live and the character you refuse to compromise. Some lessons don't need to be shouted. The most powerful ones don't even need to be spoken. They just need to be lived, right in front of the people who thought they already knew what